The transport ship Meridian Dawn hummed through the void between star systems, carrying its mixed cargo of alien diplomats, traders, and a small group of human refugees. In the ship's common area, 11-year-old sat cross-legged on the metal floor, carefully cleaning an ancient katana with a soft cloth. The blade gleamed under the artificial lights, its surface reflecting centuries of craftsmanship and tradition. "Look at the primitive human," sneered, a tall with crystalline skin that shifted colors with his emotions. Currently, his surface glowed a mocking purple, still clinging to their barbaric weapons from their savage past. The other aliens in the common area turned to watch. A group of merchants clicked their mandibles in what passed for laughter among their species. Two diplomats observed with their multiple eyes, their tentacles writhing in amusement. "Such backward creatures," added, whose voice box produced the universal translator's interpretation with obvious disdain. "They cannot even properly use plasma weaponry or energy shields. They compensate with sharpened metal like animals." His grandmother sat nearby working on her tablet. She glanced up at the aliens but said nothing, her weathered face remaining calm. At 78, she had seen enough of the galaxy's prejudices to know when words would be wasted. "Tell me, small human," approached with exaggerated curiosity, "what possible use could such a crude instrument have in our advanced civilization? Perhaps you plan to threaten our modern ships with your ancient blade." The chittered louder, their compound eyes glittering with malicious humor. "Maybe she thinks she can cut through hull plating with it," one buzzed through the translator. Carefully sheathed the katana and looked up at the towering aliens surrounding her. Her dark eyes held no fear, only a quiet confidence that seemed strange in one so young. "This sword belonged to my ancestor. He was a samurai who served his lord for 43 years without ever drawing his blade in anger." "How wonderfully useless," gurgled, his tentacles weaving dismissive patterns. "A weapon that was never used, how perfectly it represents human incompetence." "He never needed to draw it," continued calmly, "because everyone knew what would happen if he did." His crystalline skin shifted to an amused golden hue. "And what exactly would happen, little primitive? Would he wave it around and make fierce faces?" The aliens laughed again, their various forms of mirth creating a cacophony in the common area. Even some of the other species who had been minding their own business began to pay attention to the spectacle. "My grandmother taught me the old ways," said, standing gracefully with the sheathed sword in her hands. "She said that true strength isn't about the weapon you carry, but about the discipline you cultivate." Discipline, the largest, whose name translated as clicks of death, mandibles spread wide in their species' version of a grin. "What discipline could a human child possibly possess? Your species is known throughout the galaxy for being emotional, impulsive, and weak." Finally looked up from her tablet, her eyes meeting her granddaughter's briefly. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Would you like to see?" asked quietly. The question caught the aliens off guard. They had expected tears, anger, or for the human adults to intervene. Instead, this small human was offering some kind of demonstration. "See what exactly?" asked, his skin now cycling through curious blues and greens. "What this sword can do in properly trained hands." The aliens exchanged glances. Surely this was some kind of juvenile boasting. The child was barely half the height of the smallest alien present, and humans were notorious for their physical limitations compared to most galactic species. "Very well," said, his tentacles forming what humans had learned to recognize as a smile. "Show us your primitive weapon's great power." The other passengers began to gather around, sensing entertainment. A few more aliens emerged from their quarters, drawn by the commotion. Word spread quickly through the ship's communication networks that a human child was about to make a fool of herself, trying to impress her betters. Captain, a professional who had been running freight and passenger routes for 2 decades, appeared at the entrance to the common area. His skin showed the neutral gray of someone trying to maintain order without taking sides. "What's happening here?" he demanded, though his translator carried more curiosity than authority. "The human youngling wishes to demonstrate her ancestor's primitive weapon," Clicks of Death explained, his mandibles still spread in amusement. "We have graciously agreed to witness this display of human discipline." Captain's skin shifted to concerned yellow. "I cannot allow weapons demonstrations on my ship, the insurance regulations alone." "It's not a weapons demonstration," said calmly. It's a cultural presentation. I'm not going to hurt anyone or damage anything. Then what exactly are you going to do? The captain asked, his skin cycling through confused purples. Walk to the center of the common area, where the artificial gravity generators created a clear open space. She knelt gracefully, placing the sheathed katana across her knees, and closed her eyes. The aliens waited, expecting some sort of show. Instead, the human child simply sat in perfect stillness. Minutes passed. The aliens began to shift restlessly. Some started to mutter about human deception and time wasting. But something strange was happening. The girl's breathing had become so controlled it was barely visible. Her posture remained absolutely perfect, as if she were carved from stone. "Is she broken?" whispered one of the... More minutes passed. The restless energy in the room began to change. The aliens found themselves unconsciously quieting their own movements and voices. There was something unsettling about the human child's perfect stillness, something that spoke to instincts older than civilization. Skin began to shift through uncertain colors. This wasn't what he had expected. He had wanted to see the human fail at some flashy demonstration. Instead, she was doing nothing. But somehow that nothing felt more dangerous than any weapon he had ever faced. "When will she begin?" asked, his tentacles betraying his nervousness with their jerky movements. "She already has," said quietly from her seat. It was the first time she had spoken since the confrontation began. The aliens turned to look at her, confused. The old human woman's face held the same calm as her granddaughter's, but her eyes carried something else. Knowledge, experience, and perhaps a warning. "What do you mean?" Captain asked. "Watch her breathing," instructed. "Count the seconds between each breath. Notice how her heartbeat has slowed to barely detectable levels. See how every muscle in her body is perfectly controlled, yet ready to explode into motion." As if responding to her grandmother's words, his eyes opened. They were completely focused, completely present, and utterly without fear. When she looked at the aliens surrounding her, they felt as if they were being evaluated by a predator deciding whether they were worth the effort to hunt. "This is what my ancestors called," said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent common area. "Perfect awareness, complete readiness, the state of mind where action and thought become one." She rose to her feet in a single fluid motion that seemed to defy gravity. The sheathed sword moved with her as if it were an extension of her body. "Your modern weapons require power sources, targeting systems, ammunition," she continued, beginning to walk slowly around the circle of aliens. "They can malfunction, run out of energy, be jammed by electronic warfare. This sword needs only my will to guide it." "But it's still just a piece of metal," protested, though his skin now showed the pale colors of uncertainty. "How can it possibly compare to plasma rifles or energy cannons?" Stopped walking and looked directly at him. "Would you like me to show you how sharp it is?" The skin flashed bright red with alarm. "You said you wouldn't hurt anyone." "I won't," assured him calmly, "but I can show you precision." She gestured to the captain. "Do you have something I can cut that won't damage your ship?" Captain hesitated, then reached into a supply compartment and pulled out a sheet of the thin metal foil used for wrapping emergency rations. "This is standard grade aluminum composite. It's thin enough that it shouldn't." "Hold it up," instructed. The captain stretched the foil between his hands, creating a target roughly 2 feet wide and 1 foot tall. His skin showed nervous yellows and greens. Stepped back about 10 feet and knelt again, placing the katana on the floor in front of her. She closed her eyes and returned to the perfect stillness she had demonstrated before. The aliens watched, mesmerized despite themselves. There was something hypnotic about the human child's absolute control. They found themselves holding their breath, waiting for whatever was about to happen. Without any warning or visible preparation, exploded into motion. One moment she was kneeling motionless on the floor. The next she was standing with the katana fully drawn, its blade singing through the air in an arc too fast for most of the aliens' eyes to follow. She held the position for exactly 3 seconds, the sword extended at the end of her strike, her body frozen in perfect balance. Then she smoothly returned the blade to its sheath with a soft click that seemed to echo in the absolute silence of the common area. The aliens stared at the foil in the captain's hands. It appeared completely unchanged. "She missed," Clicks of Death declared with obvious relief. "The primitive weapon failed to." The foil fell apart. Not torn or roughly cut, but separated into 7 perfectly parallel strips, each exactly the same width, falling gently to the floor like metallic leaves. The common area erupted in shocked silence. Several aliens stepped backward involuntarily. Captain's skin cycled rapidly through colors that had no names in any human language. "Impossible," whispered, his tentacles writhing in distress. "The speed required, the precision, no organic being could." "My grandmother began teaching me when I was 4, said as calmly as if she had just tied her shoes. "Every day for 7 years, 2 hours of meditation, 2 hours of forms, 1 hour of cutting practice. The sword is not the weapon. The mind is the weapon. The sword is simply how the mind expresses its will." She turned to face directly. "You asked what this primitive blade could do against modern weapons. The answer is simple. Your plasma rifle needs time to charge, time to aim, time to fire. Your energy shields need time to activate. Your targeting computers need time to calculate." She smiled, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she looked like the 11-year-old child she actually was. Except her eyes still held that predatory awareness that made ancient instincts scream warnings in the back of alien minds. By the time any of those systems finished their calculations, the fight would already be over. The silence stretched on until Captain cleared his throat nervously. "Well then," he said, his skin settling into the neutral grays of someone trying very hard to restore order. "I think this has been quite educational for everyone. Perhaps we should all return to our quarters and—" "Wait," interrupted a new voice. All heads turned to see Commander, the hegemony military observer who had been traveling as a passenger. The mantis-like alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, his exoskeleton bearing the scars of a dozen campaigns. Unlike the merchants and diplomats, his compound eyes held the calculating gaze of a professional warrior. "I have heard stories," he said, his translator rendering his chittering voice into perfect, measured tones. "Stories about human warriors from there, stories about something called Bushido, a warrior's code that made them unstoppable in battle." His grandmother stood up slowly from her seat. "You know of the old ways." "I have studied many warrior cultures," Commander replied, inclining his wedge-shaped head respectfully. "The hegemony military requires its officers to understand the combat traditions of all species we encounter. Most are primitive, ineffective, or purely ceremonial, but the human warrior codes, those were different." He approached with the careful respect of one predator acknowledging another. "Your ancestors were the reason the hegemony initially classified humanity as a Class VII combat species, despite your lack of advanced technology. Individual human warriors repeatedly defeated overwhelming numbers of our forces using nothing but bladed weapons and tactical superiority." The other aliens stirred uneasily. This was not part of the galactic narrative they had learned. Humans were supposed to be weak, emotional, backwards. They were the members of galactic civilization, barely tolerated because of their usefulness as laborers and their willingness to take dangerous jobs that other species avoided. "That intelligence was classified for 200 years, Commander continued. "The Hegemony Council decided that allowing other species to know about human combat effectiveness would cause unnecessary panic and potentially disrupt the social order we have built." Skin flashed confused colors. "What are you saying? Humans are primitives, everyone knows this. They have no natural advantages, no superior technology, no conventional advantages," the commander corrected. "But conventional thinking is what gets soldiers killed." He gestured to with one of his blade-like appendages. "This youngling just demonstrated level 7 precision striking. She moved faster than my enhanced reflexes could track, with accuracy that would challenge our best targeting computers. And she did it with a weapon that requires no power source, produces no energy signature, and cannot be detected by our sensors." The weight of his words settled over the common area like a heavy blanket. The aliens who had been laughing and mocking just minutes before now looked at the small human girl with new eyes. "Moreover," Commander added, "she is untrained by military standards. This is merely the cultural education human children receive from their families. Imagine what a fully trained human warrior could accomplish." Looked up at the towering military commander. "My grandmother says the old ways are dying. Most humans in the galaxy have forgotten the disciplines our ancestors practiced." "Perhaps," the commander acknowledged, "but clearly not all have forgotten." He turned to address the gathering of aliens. Let this be a lesson to all of you. Never assume that primitive means ineffective. Never assume that simple means weak. And never, ever assume that you understand a species' true capabilities based on what they choose to show you. With that pronouncement, he bowed slightly to in the formal military manner of his species, then turned and left the common area. The remaining aliens began to disperse slowly, casting nervous glances back at the human child who was now calmly cleaning her sword again, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Lingered his skin cycling through apologetic blues and purples. We did not realize, that is to say. Looked up at him with those same calm, dark eyes. My ancestors taught that the greatest victory is won without fighting. Today, everyone learned something new and no one was hurt. I think my great-great-grandfather would be pleased. As they hurried away, approached her granddaughter and settled beside her on the floor. You did well, she said in the old language. But remember, with power comes responsibility. Others will fear what they saw today. I know, San, replied, continuing her careful maintenance of the ancient blade. But fear based on understanding is better than mockery based on ignorance. 3 days had passed since demonstration in the common area, and word had spread throughout the Meridian Dawn like wildfire. Passengers who hadn't witnessed the event firsthand sought out those who had, demanding details. The ship's communication networks buzzed with discussions, debates, and increasingly wild theories about human capabilities. Captain found himself fielding questions from passengers he had never seen leave their quarters before. A group of scholarly had emerged from their research pods to interview anyone who had witnessed what they termed the human kinetic display. Even the usually aloof celestial merchants had begun asking subtle questions about human culture and history. In her small passenger cabin, continued her daily routine as if nothing had changed. Each morning at 600 ship time, she would wake, perform her breathing exercises, practice her forms in the tiny space available, and then join her grandmother for breakfast. The ancient katana remained within arm's reach at all times, not as a threat, but as a reminder of the discipline that had shaped her young life. The captain wishes to speak with us, informed her granddaughter as they shared their morning meal of synthesized rice and vegetables. He seems concerned about something. Nodded calmly. She had noticed the way other passengers now watched her in the corridors, some with fear, some with fascination, but all with a new wariness that hadn't existed before her demonstration. Do you think we're in trouble, San? Truth is never trouble for those who live honestly, replied. But truth can be very troubling for those who prefer comfortable lies. When they arrived at the captain's office, they found him packing behind his desk, his crystalline skin cycling through agitated patterns of orange and red. Commander stood at attention near the viewport, his compound eyes reflecting the stars beyond. Honored passengers, Captain began, his formal tone betraying his nervousness. Please sit down, we have matters to discuss. As they settled into the alien-designed chairs, the captain activated a privacy screen that would prevent their conversation from being overheard by the ship's internal communication systems. I have received several, interesting, communications since your demonstration 3 days ago, he began. It seems word of the incident has reached beyond my ship. Commander turned from the viewport. The Galactic Defense Network has been monitoring all civilian communications for the past 6 months. They intercepted passenger reports of what happened in the common area. Felt her grandmother tense slightly beside her, though the older woman's expression remained perfectly calm. Is there a problem with cultural demonstrations? Asked. Not typically, the commander replied. But your granddaughter's display has triggered certain protocols. The Defense Network maintains algorithms designed to identify potential security threats based on unusual combat capabilities. We are refugees seeking a new home, said firmly. We pose no threat to anyone. Captain's skin shifted to apologetic blues. I'm sure that's true. However, I have been ordered to change our destination. Instead of the civilian resettlement station at Gate, we are now proceeding to military station Omega-7 for evaluation. The word hung in the air like a blade. Had heard enough stories from other human refugees to know what evaluation often meant. Interrogation, testing, sometimes worse. How long until we arrive? Asked, her voice carrying the same calm she had shown during her demonstration. 18 hours, Commander answered. I want you to understand this was not my recommendation, but certain members of the Defense Council have become concerned about the implications of your abilities. What implications? Demanded, her elderly voice carrying steel. The mantis-like commander hesitated before answering. The official report describes your granddaughter as demonstrating previously unknown human combat capabilities that may represent a security risk to galactic civilization. There are concerns that if such abilities are more widespread among humans than previously believed, it could destabilize the current military balance. Stood and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the stars. They're afraid, she said quietly. Yes, Commander confirmed. Fear makes people do foolish things, even intelligent people. What will happen to us at the station? Asked. The captain's skin darkened to worried grays. I honestly don't know. The orders came directly from the Defense Council. They want to study your granddaughter's abilities to determine if she represents an isolated anomaly or evidence of a broader pattern. And if they decide we're a threat, Commander's compound eyes fixed on something beyond the viewport, then you will likely never leave that station alive. The brutal honesty of his statement settled over the small office like a shroud. For several minutes, no one spoke. Finally turned from the viewport. Commander, may I ask you something? Of course. In your military experience, what happens when you corner a dangerous animal? The alien warrior's head tilted slightly. It becomes exponentially more dangerous. Desperation overrides self-preservation instincts. And what happens when you corner something that was never an animal to begin with? Commander's posture shifted subtly, taking on the alert stance of someone who had just recognized a potential threat. I am not certain I understand your meaning. Smiled, and once again, the expression made her look both like an innocent child and something far more ancient and dangerous. My ancestors had a saying, the cornered rat will bite the cat. But they also taught that the wise warrior never allows themselves to be cornered in the first place. What are you suggesting? Captain asked, his skin flashing nervous yellows. Nothing, Captain. I'm simply sharing cultural wisdom. Returned to her seat beside her grandmother. We will cooperate fully with whatever evaluation the Defense Council requires. We have nothing to hide. But as she spoke, noticed her granddaughter's breathing had shifted to the controlled pattern that preceded deep meditation. The old woman had seen this before, in the hours before most challenging demonstrations of skill. After they left the captain's office, waited until they were back in their cabin before speaking. What are you planning? Nothing dramatic, San. But if they want to evaluate my abilities, I want to make sure they have complete information to make their decision. That sounds ominous. Began her afternoon sword maintenance, the ritual movements helping her think clearly. Grandfather's journals speak of a principle called the spirit meeting the moment. When facing an impossible situation, the warrior does not try to force a solution. Instead, they become perfectly present, perfectly aware, and allow the moment itself to reveal the path forward. And what does this moment reveal to you? The young girl continued polishing the ancient blade, her movements meditative and precise. That 18 hours is enough time to prepare a proper demonstration, one that will give them exactly what they need to understand the true nature of human capability. Don't worry, son. I learned from the best teacher in the galaxy. You prepared me for this moment my entire life. Now I understand why. As word spread through the ship that their destination had changed to a military station, the atmosphere among the passengers became tense and fearful. Rumors flew about why the diversion was necessary, and increasingly, those rumors centered on the human child who had demonstrated impossible precision with an ancient sword. Some passengers demanded that the humans be confined to their quarters for everyone's safety. Others argued that this proved all humans were potentially dangerous and should be evaluated more thoroughly before being allowed into galactic civilization. A few, mostly those who had witnessed the demonstration firsthand, defended and her grandmother as harmless refugees being persecuted for their cultural practices. The debates grew heated enough that Captain was forced to post security officers throughout the common areas to prevent altercations. In the ship's dining hall, found himself defending the humans to a group of merchants who had been demanding their immediate detention. You saw what that child could do, Clicks of Death buzzed angrily, his mandibles spread wide in aggressive display. If humans possess such capabilities, they have been deceiving the entire galaxy about their true nature. Or perhaps, replied, his skin showing thoughtful purples, we have been deceiving ourselves about what primitiveness actually means. They're weapons, another chittered, biological weapons disguised as refugees. They're people, interrupted a new voice. Everyone turned to see Doctor, the ship's chief medical officer. The amphibious Aquarian rarely involved herself in passenger disputes, preferring to focus on her duties in the medical bay. I have been researching human physiology since the demonstration, she continued, her translator rendering her liquid voice into crisp universal standard. Their physical capabilities are not supernatural. They are the result of intensive training applied to a neural system that evolved for extreme adaptability. What does that mean in practical terms? Asked. Doctor settled her blue-green bulk onto a chair designed for her species. It means that any human could theoretically achieve similar results, given proper training and discipline. The child is not a mutant or an enhanced individual. She is simply an example of what her species can accomplish when their cultural traditions are properly maintained. The implications of her statement rippled through the dining hall. If one 11-year-old human could demonstrate such capabilities, what could a trained adult accomplish? What could a group of trained humans accomplish? This is exactly why they must be evaluated, Clicks of Death insisted. If humans have been hiding their true potential. They haven't been hiding anything, Doctor interrupted. Their capabilities are well documented in their own cultural archives. The problem is that no one in the galactic community has bothered to study human culture seriously. We classified them as primitives and stopped looking deeper. In their cabin had entered the deep meditative state her grandmother recognized as preparation for something significant. The young girl sat in perfect seiza position, the katana across her knees, her breathing so controlled it was barely perceptible. Whispered, not wanting to break her granddaughter's concentration, but needing to understand what was coming. Without opening her eyes, spoke in the ancient language of their ancestors. Son, tomorrow they will ask me to demonstrate my abilities for their evaluation. They expect to see a child with a sword performing tricks. What they need to see is the true nature of Bushido. What will you show them? True swordsmanship. Not the performance art we demonstrated before, but the real discipline. The one that allowed our ancestors to stand against overwhelming odds and emerge victorious. Felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Was never meant for display. It was meant for moments when death was the only alternative to victory. Then perhaps it's time for the galaxy to understand that humans have always known how to face death without flinching. As night fell on the ship, artificial as all cycles were in the void of space, passengers retreated to their quarters with new fears and new questions. Some dreamed of human warriors from the old stories, unstoppable forces that had once carved empires from chaos using nothing but discipline and steel. Others had nightmares about what they might have awakened by mocking a tradition they didn't understand. In the captain's quarters, reviewed the communication logs from the defense network, trying to understand exactly what his passengers had triggered. The more he read, the more his skin cycled through worried colors. The galactic military had been monitoring human refugees for months, watching for signs of what they termed resurgent warrior culture activities. This demonstration had triggered every algorithm they had developed to identify potential threats. But as he read deeper into the classified reports, Captain began to understand that the real concern wasn't what humans might do to galactic civilization. It was what the revelation of human capabilities might do to the carefully constructed social order that kept billions of beings living in relative peace. If humans weren't actually the primitive, harmless species they had been classified as, then what other assumptions about galactic civilization might be wrong? How many other species had capabilities they had never revealed? How stable was the peace that everyone took for granted? Commander had been right. Fear made people do foolish things. And tomorrow, at Military Station Omega-7, that fear was going to demand answers that might be more dangerous than the questions themselves. In her cabin, completed her meditation, and carefully cleaned her sword one final time before sleep. As she worked, she spoke quietly to her grandmother in the old language. Son, whatever happens tomorrow, remember that our ancestors faced far worse with far less. We are the inheritors of a tradition that survived the rise and fall of empires. A little fear from aliens who forgot how to respect strength. That is nothing compared to what the samurai endured. I know, but I also know that tomorrow you will show them something they are not prepared to see. And once they see it, there will be no going back to the comfortable lies they have built their civilization upon. Then perhaps it's time for uncomfortable truths. As the Meridian Dawn continued its journey toward Military Station Omega-7, carrying its cargo of passengers and secrets toward an uncertain fate, the stars outside continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the fears and ambitions of the small beings traveling between them. But among those small beings, an 11-year-old human girl slept peacefully. Her demilitary station Omega-7 hung in the void like a metallic spider, its numerous docking arms extended to accommodate vessels from across the galaxy. The massive structure served as a regional command center for the Galactic Defense Network, housing evaluation facilities, detention centers, and enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. As the Meridian Dawn approached the designated docking port, Captain's skin displayed the pale grays of someone trying very hard to remain professional while harboring serious doubts about what he was delivering his passengers into. Docking sequence initiated, his first officer reported. Station control is requesting immediate transfer of the special passengers in their cabin and gathered their few possessions. The ancient katana remained at its side, though both women knew it would likely be confiscated the moment they set foot on the station. Remember, whispered as they prepared to leave their quarters, we are not prisoners. We are honored guests providing cultural education to those who seek understanding. Yes, San, and if they choose to see guests as threats, that reveals more about them than about us. The docking process completed with the soft vibration of mechanical couplings locking into place. Within minutes, a security detail had boarded the Meridian Dawn to escort the human refugees to the station. The lead officer, an imposing draconian whose scales gleamed with military precision, approached with obvious caution. I am Commander. You will come with us immediately for processing and evaluation. Of course, replied politely. May I bring my ancestor's sword? It has cultural significance to my family. Commander's reptilian eyes fixed on the katana with obvious suspicion. Weapons are not permitted in the evaluation areas. It's not a weapon, said calmly. It's a teaching tool. Would you prevent a scholar from bringing their research materials? The draconian hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the unusual nature of the situation. Finally, he gestured to one of his subordinates. It will be scanned and analyzed if it presents any threat to station security. It won't, assured him, unless knowledge itself is considered threatening. As they made their way through the station's corridors, noted the subtle signs of heightened alert status. Additional security personnel at key checkpoints, weapons systems that tracked their movement, blast doors positioned to seal off sections at a moment's notice. Whatever the Defense Council was expecting, they were taking no chances. The evaluation facility occupied an entire deck of the station, its sterile white walls and harsh lighting designed to intimidate those brought there for questioning. They were escorted to a waiting area furnished with chairs clearly designed for multiple species, though none appeared particularly comfortable. You will remain here until called for evaluation, Commander informed them. Any attempt to leave this area will be considered an act of aggression against galactic security. After the security detail departed, leaving only a single guard at the door, and settled into the uncomfortable chairs to wait. Impressive, observed quietly. They've managed to make hospitality feel like imprisonment without technically violating refugee protection protocols. Fear makes people creative in unpleasant ways, replied. They didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, a different officer appeared, this one whose tentacles writhed with barely contained excitement. The human will come for initial evaluation, the alien announced. The elder will remain here. I go with my granddaughter, stated firmly. That is not permitted. The evaluation requires. Then there will be no evaluation, interrupted calmly. My grandmother is my cultural advisor. Any meaningful assessment of my abilities requires her presence to provide proper context. The tentacles twisted in frustrated patterns. This is highly irregular. So is evaluating a child without family present, pointed out. I'm sure the Defense Council wouldn't want questions raised about their treatment of refugee minors. After several minutes of consultation with unseen superiors through his communication device, the officer grudgingly agreed to allow to accompany her granddaughter. The evaluation chamber was a large, circular room with observation galleries rising on all sides. A dozen high-ranking military officers from various species sat behind reinforced transparent barriers, studying the humans as they entered. In the center of the room, a variety of testing equipment had been arranged: targets, sensors, recording devices, and measuring instruments. At the head of the observation gallery sat Admiral Al, a hegemony military commander whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was known throughout the galaxy. His compound eyes tracked movement as she walked calmly to the center of the room. "State your name for the record," a technician requested. "Daughter of and granddaughter of great-great-granddaughter of 47th in the lineage of the family sword school." The specificity of her genealogy seemed to surprise the observers. Most refugee children could barely remember their parents' names, let alone trace their lineage back 5 generations. "You will demonstrate the abilities you displayed aboard the transport vessel," Admiral Al commanded, his translator rendering his chittering voice into clipped, authoritative tones. Looked around the chamber, taking note of the recording equipment, the weapon scanners, the stress measurement devices arrayed around her. "What you witnessed on the transport was a cultural demonstration. What you're asking for now is a military assessment. They are very different things." "Explain." "A cultural demonstration shows technique, precision, and artistic beauty. A military assessment shows capability, lethality, and tactical application. Which would you prefer?" The question clearly caught the observers off guard. They had expected simple compliance, not philosophical distinctions. Admiral Al leaned forward in his observation seat. "Show us the military assessment." "I understand you scanned my ancestor's sword when we arrived," continued, ignoring his demand for the moment. "What did your analysis reveal?" A technician consulted his instruments. Standard carbon steel alloy folded approximately 16,000 times during forging. No artificial enhancements, no hidden technology. Essentially, a primitive cutting implement with no strategic value. Smiled, "And yet your algorithms classified it as a security threat significant enough to divert an entire civilian transport to a military station. Why do you think that is?" "Because of what you demonstrated you could do with it," Admiral Al replied impatiently. "Now show us those capabilities under controlled conditions." "As you wish," knelt in the center of the chamber and placed her katana on the floor before her. "But first, let me explain what you're about to witness." She gestured to her grandmother. "The discipline you're evaluating has been refined over 800 years of continuous practice. It's not a martial art in the modern sense. It's a complete system for developing human potential, physical, mental, and spiritual." "We're not interested in philosophy," Admiral Al growled. "Show us combat effectiveness." "They're the same thing," replied calmly. "What my ancestors discovered is that true combat effectiveness comes not from superior weapons or technology, but from the cultivation of what they called the immovable mind." She closed her eyes and began the breathing pattern that would prepare her for demonstration. Around the chamber, sensors began registering the changes in her physiology as her heart rate slowed, her muscle tension optimized, and her brain activity shifted to patterns the monitoring equipment had never recorded before. "Fascinating," one of the observing scientists murmured. "Her neural activity is entering a state we've only seen in highly advanced meditation practitioners, but her physical readiness indicators suggest immediate combat capability." "When the mind becomes immovable," continued, her eyes still closed, "the body becomes capable of things that appear impossible. Speed that seems to violate physics, precision that exceeds mechanical accuracy, timing that anticipates an opponent's actions before they themselves know what they will do." She opened her eyes and looked directly at Admiral Al. "This is what your algorithms detected. Not a weapon, but a way of being that transforms any human into something your military models cannot predict or counter." "Demonstrate," the Admiral commanded. "Very well, but understand that what you're asking to see is not a performance. It's a glimpse into why humans were once considered the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy, and why that classification was classified and buried." rose smoothly to her feet, the katana appearing in her hands as if it had materialized there. The movement was so fluid that even the high-speed cameras struggled to track the transition from kneeling to combat readiness. "Present your targets," she said simply. A series of mechanical devices emerged from the chamber floor, combat drones designed to test reaction times and accuracy. Each one was equipped with sensors that would register any impact and measure the force applied. "These drones will attack you simultaneously with non-lethal energy pulses," a technician explained. "Standard military protocol requires engaging each threat in sequence based on proximity and danger assessment." The drones activated, their weapons powering up with the distinctive whine of charging energy cells. According to the display screens visible to the observers, had approximately 3.7 seconds before the first drone would fire, and 8.2 seconds before all 6 drones would be in attack position. She moved before the first second had elapsed. What happened next was barely comprehensible to the observers, even with slow-motion replay capabilities. Seemed to flow between the drones like water, her katana describing impossible arcs through the air. She was never where the targeting computers expected her to be, never moving in straight lines, never presenting a stable target for their sensors to lock onto. But more incredibly, she wasn't simply evading. As she moved, her sword touched each drone with surgical precision. Not hard enough to damage them, but precisely at the points where their main processing units were located. When the movement stopped, less than 4 seconds after it had begun, all 6 combat drones were deactivated, their sensors registering impacts at their most vulnerable points. If the katana had been sharpened for combat rather than demonstration, each drone would have been destroyed. The observation chamber fell silent. Several of the military observers were openly staring, their various species' expressions of shock creating a bizarre tableau of alien disbelief. "Impossible," whispered the chief technician. "The targeting computers never achieved lock. According to our sensors, she was moving faster than our tracking systems could follow, but the motion analysis shows she never exceeded normal human movement speeds." "How is that possible?" Admiral Al demanded. Returned to the center of the chamber and knelt again, the katana once more resting across her knees. "Because your tracking systems are designed to follow predictable movement patterns. They calculate where a target will be based on where it is and what direction it's moving. But Bushido teaches the warrior to move without intention, to change direction without planning, to be where the enemy cannot predict." "You're saying you moved randomly?" "No, Admiral. I'm saying I moved with perfect awareness of what each drone would do before it did it. Not because I'm psychic, but because I read the patterns in their programming, the limitations in their design, the predictable responses built into their combat protocols." She stood and walked to one of the deactivated drones, pointing to specific components with her finger. "This one favors targets moving left to right, so I approached from below its sensor arc. This one has a 0.3-second delay between target acquisition and firing, so I timed my movement to its processing cycle. This one assumes targets will try to maintain distance, so I moved closer than its programming anticipated." The chamber's observers began to understand that they weren't just watching superior reflexes or enhanced speed. They were witnessing a level of tactical analysis and adaptive response that exceeded their most advanced combat AI systems. "Moreover," continued, "this was still a demonstration. I was showing you technique, not intent. If I had been facing actual enemies rather than training drones." She let the sentence hang in the air, but the implication was clear. The drones had been deactivated gently, precisely, with almost surgical care. In actual combat, that same movement pattern would have resulted in catastrophic destruction. Doctor's voice crackled over the communication system from the observation gallery. "Admiral, if I may, the physiological readings during her demonstration are unlike anything in our databases. Her stress indicators never elevated. Her energy expenditure was minimal. According to our sensors, what we just witnessed required no more effort than a casual walk." Meaning? Meaning this wasn't even close to her maximum capability. What we saw was a routine exercise for someone trained in this discipline. Admiral Al's compound eyes fixed on with new intensity. "How many humans possess this level of training?" "I don't know," replied honestly. "Most human families lost the old traditions when they left Earth, but some maintained the lineages in secret, passing the knowledge from parent to child as our ancestors did. Estimate, the Admiral demanded. Looked to her grandmother, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Perhaps 1 in 10,000 humans received basic training. Maybe 1 in a million achieved intermediate proficiency. Perhaps a few dozen in the entire galaxy have mastered the complete discipline. The numbers seemed small until the observers began calculating. With over 3 billion humans scattered across known space, that suggested hundreds of thousands with basic capabilities, thousands with advanced skills, and dozens with abilities similar to what they had just witnessed. And these masters, where are they? Admiral Al asked. Living quietly as refugees, laborers, merchants, and settlers, replied. Keeping their traditions alive while waiting for a time when the galaxy might be ready to see humans as something more than primitive newcomers. The implication hit the observation chamber like a shock wave. For 2 centuries, galactic civilization had assumed humans were harmless primitives, useful mainly as laborers for dangerous jobs. But if even a tiny percentage possessed the capabilities they had just witnessed. This changes everything, whispered someone in the observation gallery. Yes, agreed calmly. It does. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Admiral Al leaned back in his observation seat, his mind racing through the implications. If humans had been concealing capabilities this significant, what else might other species be hiding? How stable was the galactic order if it was based on fundamentally incorrect assumptions about the relative power of different civilizations? But more immediately pressing was the question of what to do about the humans already within galactic society. They couldn't be detained without violating every refugee protection treaty. They couldn't be deported without admitting that the entire integration program had been based on false premises. And they certainly couldn't be left unsupervised if they represented potential security threats. You present us with a dilemma, young human, the Admiral said finally. No, Admiral, corrected respectfully. I present you with an opportunity, the same choice my ancestors faced when foreign ships first arrived at their shores. Resist change and be overwhelmed by it, or adapt and find strength in what the change brings. She bowed formally, the gesture somehow managing to convey both respect and unmistakable confidence. The emergency session of the Galactic Defense Council convened 6 hours after its demonstration, conducted via secure quantum communication across 17 star systems. Admiral Al found himself in the uncomfortable position of delivering a report that would fundamentally challenge everything the Council thought they knew about galactic security. The holographic assembly chamber materialized around him as representatives from the major galactic powers linked into the network. Chancellor Eth of the Hegemony, Prime Minister of the Aquarian Federation, High Coordinator of the Draconian Empire, all the beings who had spent centuries building the current galactic order. Admiral Al, Chancellor Eth's voice carried the weight of a political experience, your preliminary report has caused considerable concern. Please elaborate on what you discovered during your evaluation. The Admiral activated the recording systems, sharing the visual and sensor data from demonstration. Even in holographic replay, the speed and precision of her movements against the combat drones was breathtaking. As you can see, he began, the human child demonstrated capabilities that exceed our current military assessment parameters. But more significantly, she claims this represents only basic proficiency in what she terms traditional human warrior disciplines. A single individual, dismissed General of the Crystalline Hegemony. Even if her abilities are genuine, one exceptional human hardly represents a galactic threat. With respect, General, you're missing the critical intelligence. Admiral Al highlighted specific data points from the sensor readings. This individual has been training since age 4. 7 years of daily practice produced these results. According to our analysis, any human child could theoretically achieve similar capabilities given proper instruction. The implications began to sink in as the council members studied the data. Moreover, the Admiral continued, she claims hundreds of thousands of humans received basic training in these disciplines before their integration into galactic society. Thousands may possess advanced capabilities, and potentially dozens have achieved master-level proficiency. Prime Minister's aquatic form shifted uncomfortably in her fluid-filled chamber. You're suggesting that humans have been systematically concealing their true capabilities for 2 centuries. Not concealing, Admiral Al corrected. Simply not demonstrating them unless challenged. According to the human elder who accompanied the child, these traditions were maintained in family lineages as cultural heritage. They had no reason to reveal them in normal civilian life. Chancellor Eth leaned forward, his ancient features creased with concern. What exactly are we dealing with, Admiral? Enhanced individuals, genetic modifications, advanced technology disguised as primitive weapons. None of those, Chancellor. What we're dealing with is training, discipline, a systematic approach to developing human potential that has been refined over centuries of continuous practice. He activated another set of recordings, showing physiological responses during her demonstration. Her neural activity patterns, muscle coordination, and sensory processing during combat exceeded our baseline measurements for her species by orders of magnitude. But according to our medical analysis, she has no genetic modifications, no technological enhancements, no artificial augmentations of any kind. Then how, demanded High Coordinator? By taking advantage of capabilities that evolution gave all humans, but that modern galactic society never encouraged them to develop. Their neural plasticity, their adaptability, their capacity for pattern recognition and predictive analysis, all natural traits that can be enhanced through proper training. The council chamber fell silent as the full scope of the revelation became clear. You're telling us, Chancellor Eth said slowly, that every human in galactic society is potentially capable of military effectiveness that rivals our elite special forces. I'm telling you that we don't know the limits of their potential. What we witnessed was described as intermediate-level proficiency by their standards. We have no data on what master-level capabilities might look like. General's crystalline form flared with agitated energy patterns. This is unacceptable. We cannot allow unknown quantities to operate freely within our civilization. And what do you propose, General? Prime Minister asked. We detain 3 billion humans based on what one child demonstrated. The legal ramifications alone would destabilize half the galaxy. We demand full disclosure, the General insisted. Every human must be tested and classified according to their actual capabilities. Those who pose threats must be monitored or contained. And how, Admiral Al interjected, do we enforce such a demand? We're talking about individuals who can disable combat drones with primitive weapons and do it so efficiently that our sensors barely registered the engagement. The uncomfortable truth settled over the assembly like a heavy blanket. They were discussing the forced evaluation of beings who might be capable of resisting such evaluation in ways the galactic military couldn't effectively counter. There is another consideration, High Coordinator added grimly. If humans possess these capabilities and have been living peacefully among us for 2 centuries, what does that suggest about their intentions? And what might happen if we treat them as threats? Explain, Chancellor Eth requested. They could have revealed these abilities at any time. They could have used them for conquest, for gaining political advantage, for establishing dominance over other species. Instead, they chose to live quietly as refugees and laborers, contributing to our civilization without demanding recognition of their true potential. The Admiral nodded. The child made a similar point. She emphasized that the greatest victory is won without fighting, and that revealing their capabilities now was meant as education, not intimidation. But now that we know, General argued, the situation has changed. They can no longer operate under the assumption of secrecy. No, agreed Prime Minister, they cannot. The question is whether we treat this revelation as a threat to manage or as a resource to integrate. Chancellor Eth called for a brief recess to allow the council members to consult with their respective governments. When the session resumed, the mood in the holographic chamber had shifted from alarm to cautious calculation. We have discussed the situation with our leadership councils, the Chancellor announced. While there are legitimate concerns about security and transparency, the consensus is that any attempt to forcibly evaluate or contain the human population would likely provoke exactly the kind of conflict we seek to avoid. Then what do you propose? Admiral Al asked. Integration, High Coordinator replied. If humans possess capabilities that could enhance our collective security, we should find ways to incorporate those capabilities into our existing structures, not through coercion but through cooperation. General's crystal form flickered with skeptical patterns. You want to trust them after they've concealed their true nature for 2 centuries. They didn't conceal anything, Prime Minister pointed out. We simply never bothered to look deeply enough. Our own assumptions about primitive cultures blinded us to what was right in front of us. Admiral Al activated a new display showing and her grandmother in their detention quarters aboard the station. The 2 humans sat quietly, the young girl teaching her elderly companion a complex series of hand movements while they waited for the council's decision. While we've been debating, he observed, they've been doing what they always do, maintaining their traditions, passing their knowledge to the next generation, living their lives with dignity despite being held against their will. That consistency of character suggests that our fears may be misplaced. What do you recommend, Admiral? Chancellor Eth asked. I recommend we release them with full honors and begin serious diplomatic discussions about how human warrior traditions might benefit galactic security. Rather than seeing their capabilities as threats, we should explore how they might serve as assets. And if they refuse to cooperate, then we respect that decision, the Admiral replied. They've lived peacefully among us for 2 centuries while possessing capabilities we never suspected. That track record suggests we have more to gain from their friendship than we have to fear from their enmity. The debate continued for several more hours, but gradually consensus emerged. The human refugees would be released and offered formal recognition as cultural consultants to the Defense Council. A new program would be established to study human warrior traditions, not for the purpose of replication, but for the sake of understanding and integration. Most importantly, the Council would begin the delicate process of reassessing their assumptions about other species and cultures that had been classified as primitive or harmless. Meanwhile, aboard military station Omega-7 sensed the change in the station's atmosphere before any official word arrived. The hostile tension that had permeated the facility since their arrival began to dissipate, replaced by something that felt more like respectful curiosity. They've made their decision, she told her grandmother quietly. And what do you sense about that decision? The young girl smiled, the expression carrying both relief and anticipation. They chose wisdom over fear, not easily and not without debate, but they chose correctly. How do you know? Because if they had chosen fear, we would already be dead or in permanent detention. The fact that we're still here, still being treated as guests rather than prisoners, means they're trying to find a path forward that doesn't require them to see us as threats. Commander arrived at their quarters an hour later, his reptilian features showing none of the suspicion they had displayed during their initial encounter. The Council has reached its decision, he announced formally. You are free to leave the station at any time. Transportation will be provided to any destination you choose within the galactic community. And, prompted, sensing there was more to the announcement. And you are both invited to serve as cultural advisors to the Galactic Defense Council, should you choose to accept. Your role would be to help develop better understanding between human communities and the galactic government. And exchanged glances, communicating in the wordless way of family members who had shared a lifetime of experiences. We accept, replied, but with conditions. Name them. First, any humans who wish to maintain their traditional practices must be free to do so without harassment or forced evaluation. Second, those who choose to share their knowledge must do so as teachers, not as test subjects. And third, the galaxy must understand that what you saw was not a demonstration of human aggression, but of human potential. These terms are acceptable, Commander confirmed. The Council hopes this can be the beginning of a new chapter in human-galactic relations. Stood and bowed formally. My ancestors taught that every ending is also a beginning. Today, the galaxy ends its ignorance about human capabilities. Tomorrow, perhaps it begins to understand what humans have always been willing to offer, not conquest but partnership. As news of the Council's decision spread throughout the station, the atmosphere continued to transform. Crew members who had viewed the humans with suspicion began to show genuine interest in their culture and traditions. Scientists requested opportunities to study human training methods from an educational rather than security perspective. Even General, via holographic communication, grudgingly admitted that the situation had been handled better than expected. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the station's personnel began to interact with humans. Where before they had seen primitive refugees to be managed and controlled, they now saw individuals with hidden depths and unexpected capabilities. It was reflected as she prepared to leave military station Omega-7, exactly what her ancestors would have hoped for. Respect earned not through violence, but through the demonstration of discipline, wisdom, and strength held in perfect balance. The galaxy was about to discover that humans had always been far more than they appeared. And for the first time in centuries, that discovery would be made through understanding rather than conflict. The age of underestimating humanity was coming to an end. 6 months after the incident at military station Omega-7, the galaxy looked very different to those who understood what had really changed. On the surface, daily life continued much as it always had. Ships moved between star systems, trade flowed along established routes, and the great bureaucracy of galactic civilization ground forward with its characteristic inefficiency. But beneath that familiar surface, something fundamental had shifted. In the prestigious halls of the Galactic Academy on Prime, a new curriculum had been quietly introduced. Comparative warrior cultures was taught by Professor, whose lectures drew standing room-only crowds of students from dozens of species. Her granddaughter often assisted with practical demonstrations, though these were carefully choreographed to educate rather than intimidate. The mistake we made, Professor explained to her diverse audience, was assuming that technology and tradition were mutually exclusive. We thought that a species with advanced star travel couldn't possibly maintain ancient disciplines, but humans carried both into space together. In the front row, a young student raised a chitinous appendage. Professor, if human capabilities were always this significant, why didn't they seek to dominate galactic politics from the beginning? Because dominance was never the goal, replied, rising from her seat at the side of the lecture hall. At 11 years old, she was technically too young to be enrolled at the academy, but her status as a cultural consultant gave her access to all facilities. Our ancestors taught that true strength protects rather than conquers. She walked to the center of the demonstration area, where a holographic display showed Earth's history during the development of Bushido traditions. When humans first developed these disciplines, they were not tools for expansion or aggression. They were responses to chaos, ways to create order and justice in times when both were scarce. The katana at her side had become as familiar to academy students as the school's own insignia. None of them could forget the recordings of her demonstration that had circulated throughout the educational networks, but they had learned to see the weapon not as a threat, but as a symbol of the principle she embodied. Moreover, Professor continued, humans who maintained these traditions understood something that the galaxy is just beginning to learn, that the most effective power is power that never needs to be used. The implications of this philosophy were still rippling through galactic society, in ways both subtle and profound. On station, human refugees were no longer automatically assigned to the lowest-paying, most dangerous jobs. Ship captains had discovered that human crew members trained in traditional disciplines possessed situational awareness and crisis response capabilities that made them invaluable during emergencies. The insurance companies had begun offering premium discounts for ships with human safety officers. In the Outer Rim territories, where piracy and smuggling had long been persistent problems, human settlers were volunteering for security positions, not because they sought conflict, but because their presence alone was beginning to deter criminal activity. Word had spread through the underworld that attacking settlements protected by traditional humans was a losing proposition. Admiral Al, now serving as liaison between the Defense Council and human communities, had observed this phenomenon firsthand during a patrol mission in the Vega sector. We received a distress call from a mining colony under attack by raider ships, he reported to the council during their monthly review session. When we arrived, the raiders had already fled. The colonists said a single human security officer had convinced them to leave by demonstrating what would happen if they attempted to land. How did one human deter an entire raider fleet? Chancellor Ed asked. He disabled their lead ship's main weapon system from 2 kilometers away, the admiral replied, using a projectile weapon that registered as barely more sophisticated than a crossbow. The raiders decided the potential loot wasn't worth tangling with what they assumed was some kind of enhanced sniper. In reality, the security officer had been a former ceramic artist from Earth who had learned traditional archery as a child. But the raiders had no way of knowing that the seemingly impossible shot had been accomplished through 40 years of disciplined practice rather than advanced technology. Such stories were becoming common throughout human communities, creating a new dynamic in galactic society. Humans were no longer seen as helpless refugees to be protected or primitive workers to be exploited. They were increasingly viewed as valuable allies whose capabilities were still being discovered. This shift had not been without complications. Doctor, now heading the Institute for Human Studies, had documented over 300 incidents where humans had been challenged to demonstrate their abilities by aliens who didn't believe the stories circulating through the communication networks. The pattern is consistent, she explained during her presentation to the Galactic Health and Safety Commission. An alien individual or group decides to test a human's claimed capabilities. The human initially refuses, explaining that such demonstrations are inappropriate. The alien persists, often escalating to harassment or threats. Finally, the human provides a brief, carefully controlled demonstration that leaves the challenger shocked and embarrassed. "Are these incidents causing social disruption?" asked Commissioner. "Quite the opposite," Doctor replied. "They appear to be serving an educational function. Each incident spreads awareness about human capabilities and reinforces the message that humans prefer peaceful resolution, but are fully prepared to defend themselves if necessary." The most significant incident had occurred on the trade world of Nexus VII, where a group of draconian merchants had attempted to force a human shopkeeper to sell his business at below-market rates. When verbal intimidation failed, they had escalated to physical threats. The shopkeeper, a quiet elderly man named Wei Ming, had initially tried to de-escalate the situation through traditional diplomatic channels. When those failed, and when the draconians actually laid hands on him, his response had been swift and definitive. Security footage showed him moving through the group of 8 large reptilian aliens like water flowing around stones. None of them had been seriously injured, but all of them had found themselves on the ground, thoroughly subdued, and completely bewildered about how it had happened. The most remarkable aspect of the incident, the security chief had reported, was that merchant never stopped smiling. Even while defending himself against 8 attackers, he maintained a pleasant, apologetic expression, as if he were sorry for the inconvenience he was causing them. The draconian merchants had filed a complaint with the local magistrate, claiming they had been attacked by a human with illegal combat augmentations. The medical examination that followed had revealed that Wei Ming was a 73-year-old man with arthritis in both hands and a heart condition that required medication. The magistrate had dismissed the charges and suggested that the draconians might benefit from learning more about human culture before conducting business in human communities. Similar incidents throughout the galaxy were gradually creating a new understanding of what it meant to be human. The old stereotypes of emotional instability, physical weakness, and primitive thinking were being replaced by recognition of emotional discipline, adaptive strength, and strategic sophistication. But perhaps the most profound changes were occurring in how humans saw themselves. On Earth, which had remained largely isolated from galactic politics despite being humanities, news of the galactic discovery of human traditions had sparked a renaissance of interest in ancient disciplines. Martial arts schools that had struggled to maintain enrollment for decades suddenly found themselves overwhelmed with applicants. Libraries reported unprecedented demand for historical texts about warrior philosophies and combat traditions. Young humans who had never given much thought to their ancestors' ways began seeking out the elderly masters who had kept the traditions alive. Children who had been raised on worlds light years from Earth started asking their grandparents to teach them the disciplines their great-grandparents had practiced. Now 12 and serving as a junior cultural ambassador, often received communication requests from human communities across the galaxy. They want to understand what it means to be human in a way they never had to think about before, she explained to her grandmother during one of their regular conversations. For 2 centuries, humans defined themselves in terms of what they weren't, not as advanced as other species, not as strong, not as unified. Now they're discovering what they actually are. "And what are they discovering?" asked. That being human isn't about what we lack compared to other species. It's about what we carry forward from our ancestors. The discipline to improve ourselves, the wisdom to avoid unnecessary conflict, and the strength to protect what matters when we have no other choice. The most visible symbol of this transformation was the establishment of the human cultural centers throughout the galaxy. These facilities served multiple functions. They provided traditional training for humans who wanted to reconnect with their heritage. They offered educational programs for aliens interested in learning about human philosophy and practices. And they served as neutral grounds where conflicts between species could be resolved through mediation rather than force. The Center on Prime had become particularly renowned for its success in resolving disputes that had previously seemed intractable. Mediators trained in human conflict resolution techniques were achieving settlement rates that exceeded traditional diplomatic methods by significant margins. The key insight, explained Master, who directed the center's mediation program, is that most conflicts arise not from genuine incompatibility of interests, but from failure to understand each other's perspectives. Human traditional training emphasizes the development of empathy as a component of tactical awareness. A warrior who cannot understand their opponent's motivations cannot predict their actions. This principle had proven remarkably effective in commercial disputes, territorial disagreements, and even complex multi-species negotiations about resource allocation and trade policy. The success of human mediation techniques had led to formal recognition of humans as a specialized diplomatic species by the Galactic Commerce Guild. Human mediators were now requested specifically for high-stakes negotiations, and the waiting list for their services extended for months. Commander, who had been promoted to head the new Interspecies Relations Division, often reflected on how dramatically the situation had evolved since that day aboard the Meridian Dawn. "We thought we were dealing with a potential security threat," he noted during a strategic review meeting. "Instead, we discovered a resource for enhancing galactic stability. The humans have given us tools for resolving conflicts we didn't even know we needed." But perhaps the most important transformation was one that could only be measured in individual lives and personal relationships. Throughout the galaxy, members of different species were beginning to interact with humans as equals for the first time. The automatic assumption of human inferiority that had characterized interspecies relations for 2 centuries was giving way to genuine curiosity and respect. On trade ships, in research facilities, in diplomatic missions, and in countless small communities across known space. The choice, as always, is yours. Reams filled with the wisdom of ancestors who had taught her that true strength was not about the sword you carried, but about the spirit that guided it. Tomorrow, she would teach that lesson to an entire galaxy, whether they were ready to learn it or not. The old woman smiled and returned to her tablet, while her granddaughter continued the meditation of caring for her ancestor's sword. Around them, the ship hummed through space, carrying its passengers toward destinations unknown, but now with a very different understanding of what it meant to be human.